Good evening, Black Light family. We have a very special guest. Her name is Victoria. I'm glad to have her on because I think that this is a very important topic that needs to be discussed, that isn't discussed a lot. So today we'll be speaking about mitigation and how important it is. And without further ado, I will introduce Ms. Victoria Rusk, and she can give us a little background. Just tell us, how you got started in mitigation and how important it is to you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for having me on the show. Hello, specifically North Carolina. And um, so, how myself, who am I, Victoria Rusk, mitigation specialist. I would say, like this day and age, I'm a mitigation expert now. And I had started mitigation in 2011. And just to give that a little bit of context, in 2003 is when the ABA guidelines made mitigation mandatory in capital cases. So in 2011, I got hired to work for an organization that only did capital cases. And so I learned mitigation back then about how to do it specifically for capital cases. And that's really all mitigation was available for back then. And so I worked for that organization for almost 2 years, and then I started my business, Heart of Justice. And I have lived in Texas mainly, but I've taken cases all over the United States. And so from 2011 to now, my background before that is in journalism and public relations, and I worked in PR for the Epilepsy Foundation, where I did learn a lot about the brain, and I've always been fascinated about neuroscience. And then
Mhm.
of course, I learned a lot working just as a newbie, right? And when I worked for this public defender's office. The thing is that when I started my business as an entrepreneur, I really got to go to the trainings I wanted to go to. I got to hire who I wanted to hire to get me where I wanted to get and go. And I probably, and then I networked, and there's just this big entrepreneurial component of being a mitigation specialist too. Especially back then, we still don't have enough jobs, mitigation jobs. But back then, when I'm running my business and I'm learning so much about capital murder cases, it probably was going to be about, well, in 2017, I started writing and producing Mitigation University, which is the online course. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, I wrote the book, The Handbook for Mitigation. And so I've always wanted to like further the career field. And how do we do that? Because it was really disheartening to be out here working and people not knowing who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it, and being really skeptical of it. And so became more of my mission to be a mentor and a coach and an educator about mitigation more so than anything else. And that's primary where I spend my focus on now. I do take cases, but I am really picky about it because burnout is real and compassion fatigue is real. And I just want to be honest about some of the hurdles that are in this business too. So, first things first, like I was a journalist, so I knew how to write and I knew how to organize information because I worked in TV news for a long time. And that's kind of how I learned more about like being a good interviewer and stuff. And then when I got in the business now, 12 years, um, I think that like I'm perfecting it and coaching it and helping other people build their business and their careers where whatever that looks like in a variety of ways with a variety of people.
That's amazing. Because a lot of people don't really understand what mitigation is. If you ask the average person, and you're like, "Well, do you know what mitigation is?" They're like, "No." So can you explain to us what mitigation is and why it's important to the criminal justice field?
So mitigation for criminal defense is for any criminal case really. And so it's not just for capital cases. That's just kind of where it started, but now it's growing beyond that. And what we're doing as a mitigation specialist, or what a mitigation investigation is to learn about not only the person and who they are so that they can be uniquely punished, right? So if we go into punishment or we go and we have a hearing or there's a negotiation, We have to first face it that everybody, mainly everybody, there's not a lot of people walking. Whenever we get to celebrate a not guilty, well, like, I'm there with you. I don't want anybody to go to prison,
Right.
and I want people to be able to prove it, and that they have to do their job for a person to go to prison. So, I mean, my whole thing is that people are getting punished. If you are indicted, if you are arraigned, it's a 99% chance you're going to get punished. And so, what mitigation does is able to like give those decision makers, jury, judge, or prosecutor in a negotiation, the information they need to mitigate a sentence less than the maximum. And so mitigation investigation starts with meeting the person who's accused and learning about them through who they are. We do not investigate the crime. We
Right.
investigate the person, and we separate to a certain degree the alleged crime and the person. And so we're researching them through records and their timeline of their life, and we're interviewing a variety of people who are around this person and molded this person to be who they are. So it starts with the person who's accused, of course, and spending a considerable amount of time with them, and then it moves to family, friends, community members, school teachers, coaches, um, previous employers, co-workers, classmates, like you name it. In a capital murder case, I can interview 80 to 100 people easy, and then not all of those people are, but they can get reached out to. In non-capital cases, that might look like interviewing 10 to 12 people. It just depends. It might only be three. It just depends on what we're working with, because there's a lot of variables. But you're interviewing all these people to get a glimpse at certain chapters or times in this person's life that would be that would like corroborate some of the mitigating factors of their life, whether it's records or an affidavit or somebody who comes in to testify to say, like, oh yeah, I could see the difference in this person before their head injury and after their head injury, or something like that.
So you're basically gathering information to do like a character, to explain to the jury what a character, the character of the person, to humanize them more or less and understand, hey, well, this person has been through this in their childhood life, and this is what could have possibly led to this accusation that you are accusing them of. So that's what mitigation is, to build the character of the person that's accused, right?
Yes. There's a lot of different type of mitigation that I want to bring in there. So yes, there are character witnesses that say so much more deeper information about who this person is. And one of the things, like if you write a character letter for somebody, what I would suggest people to do is that you're going to say how you know them, like how you met, and who you are in the community, right? To put your own value and humanize yourself too. And then you're actually explaining how this person, giving examples of how this person showed love to you or you showed love to them. That's actually humanizing them. So there is a character, like the character development part that's there. And some of this is like what I would call more soft mitigation, because it's like, this is a good person. They've helped me before. I trust them with my children. They worked with me for this many years. They have this kind of work ethic. Or they were in my class during this time. And I remember whenever I was going, they were there for me when I was going through something. Yes, I would consider that soft mitigation. Hard mitigation is like, I have evidence from medical records, military records, education records that this person actually has a learning disability. And then I have teachers who have witnessed this person's learning disability before age 18 when they were in school. So now we're talking about hard mitigation evidence. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah,
So a
that
lot
makes
of times people want to like think that mitigation is some kind of like form of covering up some of the bad or whatever. No, it's the real story. It's the real why behind the crime. And I say alleged crime because they're not guilty or not guilty, because punishment is a lot of times after they've pled guilty or they're found guilty. So, a lot of times a mitigation specialist isn't going to be called onto a case unless the attorney is just like, all the cards are stacked against him and I need to help. How do I explain this? So I mean, honestly, I really don't get to work on certain cases that people wouldn't label heinous.
Do you think that that is, I guess, a added factor that should be added? Like, it shouldn't just be capital punishment. Like, in here in North Carolina, you only get mitigation for capital punishment. And I feel like there's a lot of people who have mental health disabilities, who've had trauma, generational trauma, that haven't committed heinous crimes, but the audience should know that because just like, there's a lot of people who
Yeah.
have autism, and that's a lot of times not even brought up in their case when it's not even a
No,
heinous
that is
crime.
that's a travesty. And so, yes, I mean, so North Carolina's sitting over there. Texas was like this at one point too. So I just want to say that there is opportunity for mitigation for all criminal cases, right? The lawyers got to know that it's there. They need to have access to a mitigation specialist. And at some point in time, North Carolina will get some more and more and more. And investigators too, they need to know this kind of thing too. And the prosecutors and the judge need to be educated about the behavior that leads up to and or the symptoms or the mental illness, the brain injuries, the intellectual disability that can lead up to criminal behavior, and like how that's happening, why that's happening. And so, all professionals honestly need to have a mitigation muscle in this day and age, because prosecutors, whether they like it or not, they're begging for it. They want to know this information, and the jurors do too. I
Mhm.
mean, all the crime TV shows and First 48 and like, Dateline and all that kind of stuff. All that's mitigation,
Yeah,
and
especially
it's fun.
Dateline.
And when you're able to get it before punishment, like the punishment hearing, whenever to front load mitigation in the guilt innocent phase of the trial, you're actually being able to, share this kind of information, and that somebody can make that a mitigating factor if they decide that they're not that guilty or they don't need to be punished this much or whatever, right? So, I mean, I just want to say too that, like, yes, every case, because like you're saying, people who have misdemeanors or who have low rank felonies, they could be autistic, they could be bipolar, they could be schizophrenic, they could be on their, like, during the onset ages of these mental illness. So they're growing up all through their teenage years and they hit 18, 19, 22, 23, and they start to have mental illness symptoms that can be
Mhm.
documented and seen if you know how to listen for it.
Right, right.
So yeah, all that information has to come up, but it's about, we're in the stage in our country right now where when it comes to mitigation, that people are getting educated and they know about mitigation, but they don't necessarily know how to use it all the way. And when they do, they're still trying to work through some of the courage, and they're still trying to work through some of the political factors that come with, knowing the stuff that you know and making sure you have not just the soft mitigation evidence, but the hard stuff too, to be able to prove it up and show patterns and things. And so that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I need people know what's going on. Like, it was so frustrating being a mitigation specialist and like, like I love lawyers, like, right, like
Right.
those are my coworkers, and so and helping them get it and understand it. Sometimes I too had to say, like, Victoria, this lawyer is not going to be able to do a 180-degree turn. We're going to have to get them to 30 degrees first. And then if they
Mhm.
do that and they feel successful, they'll do 50 degrees next time. And that's really how it works. And having this level of compassion too for my coworkers, the lawyers, and or to help them help the DA see some other things or present certain mitigating evidence to
Mhm.
judges and allow the judge to like understand stuff like that you can Google, like frontal lobe development. You can Google that stuff. Like, it's
Mhm.
out there for everybody to know. And so
Yeah.
how do we like set them up to be able to see stuff that we're not, bullshitting them? We're like really helping them know how how this person got to be where they are, and some of the circumstances or understanding, like, it really does connect the dots. And a lawyer being so proud that he has this type of information, evidence, and whether it's records or people to come testify to, that lawyer feels that much more supported. And then the cards fall where they fall.
Right.
You don't ever get to have like, okay, well, I presented all this evidence, and so that means this person's only going to get 20 years or only going to get this. I mean, sometimes the negotiations can be so much more merciful, but they people are factoring in that the alleged crime. They really are, and you can't get away from that. So you have to embrace it and just be honest about what we're looking at here, and the
Do
day and
you
age, and all the stuff that comes to the table. It's so many people.
Right, that's true. Do you think that if jurors had like, if more jurors had this pertinent information, do you think that people would have a lesser severe sentence? Or if prosecutors made sure that they had this information, which could be in a way exculpatory evidence for them, and even judges knowing this information, do you think that that would change the criminal justice landscape? Or are we just stuck in some states are just stuck in the part of being tough on crime, and this person committed crime, and then they have to hear the public come back to them and be like, well, they should have got life without parole, and you let them get away, and they only got 20 or 15 years. Like, how would prosecutors and judges handle that type of backlash? Because they would get
Yeah,
it.
I mean, my thing is that, voters are voters, so we have to let them do their how that kind of plays out. But I mean, I've never heard a judge come and say like, they're not going to admit like I'm scared to be lenient here because I get this and this. But and a lot of times they have a lot of power. It doesn't mean they have a lot of autonomy. And so they can be, but if you give them the information and they think that other people, their counterpart or even their neighbor, like if the neighbor, like if they knew all this kind of stuff, like they would understand, And so I mean, I just feel like it has to get trendy and then it becomes more, right?
More.
But first,
Mhm.
what has to get trendy, let's say in North Carolina, is getting a mitigation specialist on the case. That has to get trendy first. And so, but what about it changing the landscape? Yes, because I've changed the landscape here in Houston, Texas. Like when I first started here, you weren't able to have an interview room access as a mitigation specialist. But I got those court orders like it wasn't shit. And I
Right.
went in there and did it. And then they would have signs, saying that like everybody would need to be cuffed, this and that. Like, I mean, there's rules that were shifted and changed for the betterment of the product, right? Like doing mitigation, having a better defense. And so now, I mean, I think everybody does it, but at first they weren't doing that. And so it takes people who are change makers to kind of go and like push it a little bit, right? And so I
Mhm.
had to be courageous talking to lawyers who didn't know me because I was new to Houston or whatever, asking for what I want, and I had to be willing to walk away. And that's the other thing about that takes courage is saying like, okay, if you're going to do it like this, then you got to find somebody else. Well, luckily, in 2011, 2012, there wasn't other people.
Right.
So there's not that much to choose from. So,
That's
you
true.
have to know where your power is too and where to flex. And so that's part of that. But I mean, I would just say, there's stages to this. And I really do understand that and get that. And so depending on where somebody is or what they're able to do and their own personal goals and courage, like all those things really are a major factor in doing the work. And so I mean, I take in the whole person. I'm all about holistic criminal defense. And I mean, it's holistic all the way from the mitigation specialist to the criminal
To
defense
the end.
team to the court.
Mhm.
And so as soon as I learned like what community organizing was and how powerful it was, well, then I started applying that to criminal defense cases, right? But not all mitigation specialists do that. Um, but I know like what it is and what it's doing, and I'm not afraid to talk about mitigation with anybody. So then I do, the word does get around, and that's for any mitigation specialist. But I mean, changing the landscape looks like the court accepting mitigation as a profession, and then lawyers either learning the mitigation, how to do a mitigation investigation themselves, like how to actually do it, then how to present the information. There's a lot of dots. There's a lot of dots to connect. It's not just ABC 1, 2, 3. It's complicated.
Right.
There's a lot of soft skills. Some lawyers and or investigators don't have these soft skills, but some people who maybe have a background as a journalist or an anthropologist or a social worker or a teacher or a nurse would. And
Right.
so it takes a variety, a community, of people. And
People.
so,
Mhm.
and now I'm in the part of my career where I'm like willing to push the envelope. Like I'll teach anybody to do mitigation. And then if you got the hustle, you can go out there and do it. Now, not a lot of people. That's not a popular thing to say. People get real like protective. of the career and all this kind of stuff, but like I know a gatekeeper when I see one. And so we do our the next best thing, what that looks like. And I mean, when the book is written in eighth grade English so that more people can have access to the information, because not everybody is going to get access to a mitigation specialist. So everyone can know and go to, like a mom or a spouse or a loved one can go to a lawyer and say, "Hey, I know this information, and I want to tell you that my brother was in a special needs class, and I know his teacher. We need to get these records."
Mhm. And
And
that's
then we
very
have, then we're
important.
going and we're cooperating because that's what all of us want. Criminal defense as a professional, we want cooperation,
Mhm.
you know. And so if we
And
put the
that's
information in the hands of the people who are actually getting, um, negatively impacted because of their family member in this situation, and they know that there's a way and they have the willingness, then we can really get somewhere.
yeah, and I'm glad you made that book because a lot of parents and individuals don't know about mitigation. So when their child is caught in a capital murder case, they do have a mitigation specialist, but I've seen in some cases where the mitigation specialist in my opinion, gets the bare minimum of the information. Like they may be like, oh, well, they finished high school and they have a job when you have like a list of things on your mitigation form that you could go find out. Like, what kind of childhood trauma did they go to? Are they adopted? They have any type of mental health disabilities, learning disabilities. And a lot of that is just not done in depth. It's just like I've seen a lot of mitigation papers where it's just the bare minimum, where it's you had a job and you have children. And so I know. And so it's important that not only does the legal community understand mitigation, but the community in itself understand mitigation. Because if we understand it, then we're able to push for policy change. We're able to push the lawyer to be like, hey, sir, there's some more information that needs to be in this file that you're missing that you could defend that could help my son, daughter, grandson, granddaughter. So it's important as a community that we really understand the things that's going on in court and that we understand how to help our loved one if we're ever caught in that situation. So my next question to you is, what are the key steps involved in implementing a mitigation, like a really good mitigation plan?
There's so many ways to answer this question. So it just like depends on what the resources are, you know what I'm saying? And what I hear you say is that it's disheartening to get like 50 or 100 hours of a mitigation investigation on a capital murder case. How would we even get 10 hours on like a misdemeanor case, or a juvenile case, and so I just want to say too that I'm so sad. It's so sad because I know it's like I'm really disappointed right now because I know there is access and ways to get 1,000 hours on a capital murder case because I've done it and I know other mitigation specialists who have too because the industry standard is 400 hours. And so I just want to say that first is that the industry standard for a capital case is 400 hours. And that means that to me, standard means that that's low. And because criminal defense standards, criminal justice is needing reform so bad. So the standards, a lot of places are low.
Hello.
And so
Mhm.
I feel confident saying that. But to get more hours on criminal defense or on a capital murder case for sure would be like getting an affidavit from me and from like my mentors and other mitigation specialists that they will hold a hearing about mitigation saying we have to have this kind of work done. And so somebody in whatever community is, hearing this, I don't care what state it is, this is how things get done, is that there's going to be actual hearings and stuff, and that the hearing goes on the record about how important mitigation is. And then there's evidence and affidavits that are submitted to the court to convince the court that this is important work. That's how the change happens, right there, like in one jurisdiction, in one courtroom. So that would have to be every single courtroom in every single jurisdiction, right? And people
Right.
are like coming to the plate, like coming to up to bat about mitigation, right? So that's one thing. Okay. So then when we think about just like whoever you know or whoever I know, and people are coming to me and saying like, okay, this is what happened. My son was involved in an is got involved in this, alleged crime, and I don't know what to say, do whatever, whatever. Like, okay, number one, if you need a lawyer, you needed it yesterday. It's not now. Like, you already know that you are like needing that kind of help. And so the resource that I have, the handbook for mitigation, like, of course, people who know me or know you or know, they know how to get their hand on that, downloadable copy or whatever on the website. And so all the information is right there. But just for other people who are maybe just listening to this for the first time, I'm going to say that like if you can't get a professional mitigation specialist, then you need to know. You need to Google mitigation and learn a little bit about it, and then go have a conversation with the attorney about it, right? About who
Mhm.
say, well, what can you tell me about mitigation? And I want to say too, like, attorney example guy or girl, you don't maybe know what it is all the way, because I know that this is a new concept. This is a relatively new concept in criminal defense. And so I'm learning too, and I want to bring it to your attention. And then, as a legal professional, as a mitigation expert, I'm going to tell you to document that. Document everything, all the interaction that you have, and still be compassionate towards your loved one's attorney, because this is complex, and you can be both. You can be a really good advocate, and you can, document everything that you do and have
Right.
witnesses to it too, right? Because you don't ever
Mhm.
know what's going to happen in a hairy situation. So that's the other thing too, is inviting the attorney to understand what the mitigation is. And if you know what it is and you can point it out, because you know that your loved one has a mental illness or a behavioral disorder or a head injury, or an intellectual disability, then those are the key things that you got to know about. That's actually hard mitigation evidence, okay?
Right.
Because you could go to the lawyer as saying, I'm wanting to talk to them about my daughter, and I go and I say, hey, my daughter, I held her back in third grade, and I know that she has some learning disabilities, but I don't think that she's intellectually disabled. She's doing okay, but like, these are the other things. Also, this is all hypothetical. My husband and I got a divorce, and that affected her really bad when she was 12, 13, 14 years old. And this is the symptoms and the things that I saw. And I got her in counseling, and here are those records. Or I didn't get her in counseling because these were my financial restraints that I had. And this is what that looked like. And, she has a teacher that I would get called by all the time, and I could, go talk with her and see and tell her what's kind of going on. I mean, this is me as the mom having to rise above my own shame and rise above so many harsh emotions for myself, towards myself and my daughter, to go talk to the lawyer about these kinds of things. So this is the one of the big challenging things about people being their own advocate or their loved one's advocate, because they're having to still deal with some very um, crushing emotions to be objective. It's almost humanly impossible. That's why you want the professional.
Right.
But it can happen. It can happen. And if you put your lawyer on to some of the mitigation evidence, if you put them on or put them in the right direction in the most loving way possible, and I just say that because they're already dealing with 100+ clients probably. And so
Mhm.
that's a problem with the system, not the lawyer.
Mhm.
But we'll take it out on the lawyer, but that's a problem with the system. And we need to
Mhm.
be able to see the difference with that. And if we can come cooperative, compassionate with some information, they'll probably give you a little bit more time or energy, because that's just the way it works. That you're going to attract a lot more flies with honey than vinegar.
So let's say, for instance, you don't have family support. How would you go about, like, how should that be handled when you don't have anybody to come and stand up for your innocence and say, hey, my child had this, my child had that. You have a lot of kids that are in CPS and they don't have family support. They don't even know their families. And a lot of them, I think I read a article where it said 99% of them will end up in the carceral system. And so, what do we do about those who don't have family support?
How is that person going to know even what mitigation is? And how is that person going to be able to have a conversation if they only get three if that conversation's with their lawyer? How are they going to be able to even get the time that's needed to have the rapport that is required to share? I was a foster I'm a foster kid. Sometimes it'll come up, but that lawyer might not even have a clue because they're not actually mirror entering interviewing. They're not actually a social worker. They're a lawyer.
Mhm.
So they're not even knowing what they're hearing. So how I don't even know how to answer that question because there's so many other complexities that come with that understanding. Like, yes, is my book in some prisons and some jails? Yeah, but like it ain't enough. I don't know how I would reach or how mitigation would reach that person unless people are talking about it in the jail. But do they even have the self esteem and the security and the confidence to speak truth to power as a person accused of a crime to the lawyer? That's a big jump.
Mhm.
So that's, I mean, truthfully, a helpless situation that there's no way for me to know how to answer that other than to do what I'm doing and what you're doing right here and advocating for this type of work for people to learn and to get, a grip on on having access to this information.
That's why I think it's important to have advocates, involved in with lawyers, because that's what I did with one of my guys that I advocated for in 2021 who had a capital murder case, and I was basically the one that was able to talk and go to the media and humanize him and have his family humanize him as well, and I met his mitigation specialist. I didn't see his paperwork to see what information she gathered, but that's why it's important to have advocates because a lot of people don't have family support. So if you have an advocate and they know about mitigation, they can go to the lawyer and be like, "Hey, I know this person, was A, B, and C, and this person had this, and this person had that." So I think that we also have to change the way we look at the criminal justice system and not just put it on attorneys and prosecutors, but it has to be advocates. Just like how, prosecutors have victim advocates. The defense don't have any advocates
That's
at
right.
all. You know what I mean? So I think it's
Mhm.
time for the defense attorneys to start looking and seeking to have advocates in their office to help them with things like that because you are going to come across clients who have no family support. So they're not able to give you any background because sometimes they don't even know. Sometimes they're so traumatized they can't even tell you their background. Like when I looked at my
Yeah.
husband's mitigation, the only thing was on his mitigation paper was that he completed high school and that he had a job. They forgot to mention that he was adopted, that he was emancipated from a group home at 17, and that's what started, a lot of his in and out of jail. Like none of that was on there because he didn't have family support to be like, "Oh, well, he went through this A, B, C, and D." So I think it's important that the defense starts trying to look into having like a holistic public defender or at least having an advocate that can help you get to where you need to be able to defend your client to the best ability. I mean, because you're an advocate as well. When you're a defense attorney, your job is to be an advocate for your client. And then you need an advocate to help you in certain situations because a lot of times attorneys can't go and talk to the media. They have gag orders. So if you have an advocate like me, and I was able to go talk to the media and have his family do press conferences, then humanize him, then that made a big difference as to if I wouldn't have came in, then he probably would have got convicted of capital murder with no evidence at all. But it's important to start shifting the way that we do things in a criminal justice era and system.
Yes, yes. And I mean, and that's where it boils down to sharing and showcasing the injustices. So not
Mhm.
having this information and that, if all the mitigation that they actually did in your husband's case for capital murder, that's straight up ineffective. And that's an appeal process, right? That you have to go through and then the higher courts decide if somebody is ineffective or not. But if, the ABA guidelines say 400 hours. So if you can't prove 400 hours, it's ineffective. Some judge could say that. So there's
Right.
that. Okay. And I mean, to me, these are, when you're talking to somebody with expertise a mitigation specialist who has been able to work in certain counties or jurisdictions where I've been funded enough money to be able to work those amount of hours. Like I know that this stuff is possible. And I'd be careful not to compare because comparing is losing. So I'd be careful about that, right? But I just know that that is part of it. And then as an advocate, mitigation specialist, and businesswoman, I had my guidelines and my standards for heart of justice high enough that I wouldn't work and or work with a lawyer who didn't get me the funding and the this and the that I really needed to have, the time. And, so I had my own guidelines I was so thoughtful about that once I was in the business and I was in and people were calling me a lot for work, I'd be like, oh, if you don't visit your client, I ain't working with you. Oh, like if you don't get me $10,000, I'm not even going to start because this is capital murder. This costs money. We're about to
Money.
have $1 million trial and you're talking about you're going to get me $5,000. Like, this is child's play. You need to call somebody else to play with. And so once you have some confidence as a professional, you're able to have these conversations and then you earn your respect and people earn their right and they value their no just as much as their yes. And this is a process. We're talking about like I'm 12 years in the business now and people who've worked way more than me,
Right.
but you learn quick and you do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it. And for me, doing what I was supposed to do when I was supposed to do it was really faith based. I just had to have faith that things were going to happen when they were going to happen. Whenever I said no, the next day or the day after that, somebody would call me that I could say yes to.
Right. Right. That's important. That's really important. I mean, because if you don't have boundaries and standards, then you're just gonna get ran all over. And I
I just
mean,
want to say, like, I don't know anybody in North Carolina, so I ain't trying to talk about nobody else, but that's what's happening there. Right? Like, because as a
mm,
businesswoman doing mitigation, if I worked in North Carolina, like, I would make sure that my profession is valued in such the way. And I would organize my own mitigation community because that's what happened for me here in Texas. Is that the mitigation specialist was like, you are not working for that amount of pay. You are not doing that, Victoria. You can't do that. And I'd be like, okay, how am I going to make my money? How am I going to make my bills? How am I going to do whatever? And we were all helping each other and figuring it out so that way we could flex because that's how it happens. There is no like organized, um, what is it called when workers get together and they organize and then they
the
have like a
union.
representative. Right. There ain't no mitigation union. There's none of that. It was
Right.
just like, a dozen ladies. Maybe there was a couple of guys in there that were choosing like, we're gonna have to stand still for a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I understand that because if you don't, then you will be overworked and underpaid real fast,
That
quick,
is
and in a
what's
hurry.
wrong with the criminal justice system right now. That's what's happening with the public defender's office right now, all across America. So I mean,
Yes.
that's what it is. That's why I can't. I mean, as an entrepreneur, this is going to be the smartest, best thing for me to be able to do and do the work the way that I want to do it with my own, guidelines and my own standards and keeping it high. And that I have no clients on death row because of that, because of my own choices.
I know that's right, girl. So tell us, what are some of the misconceptions about mitigation in the criminal justice field?
I think that one of the misconceptions is that people think of a lot of the soft mitigation like this is a good person, and they just had a bad day, and that they will do like some of the soft mitigation like that they're good people because everybody is good. I never represented a bad person. I never did. Everybody is cool. They have the ability to love and be loved. And I've met all their friends and family and other people too in there and their lives that know who they are and where they are. And I'm talking about like just such rich lives, like such beautiful lives that I've got to witness. But I think that what happens, like how mitigation gets kind of like they think that it's like really just a lot of like um, crying ladies on the stand and some beggars and some like begging for mercy and this and that, and it almost is a little dramatic, and sometimes people cry and it is dramatic, but if it's sincere, it's sincere. where mitigation really is science. It's like this person was like this before their head injury and then they weren't like that anymore. And this is what depression looks like. And mitigation also is like, tracking somebody's timeline of their life. It's not silly. It's uncomfortable because real life is uncomfortable, you know? And when we talk about subject matters about how what humanity can really do to each other way before a crime, it's
Right.
disgusting. And so it's just so terrible to look at the underbelly of the world, like to look at the underbelly of humanity. It is challenging. Oh gosh. Like compassion fatigue is real. You know what I'm saying? I have my own secondary trauma from this kind of work. So I just want to say that, like, it is not nice. It does not feel good. But if you work in criminal justice, I don't think that that's what you
Nothing's
expect.
nice.
Yeah.
Nothing's
And
good in
so
criminal justice.
that's kind of the part of it that's hard to really look at and request a juror, request a judge to look at these things and figure out why this stuff happens. And how do you set that up? Well, it's hard work. And so
Mhm.
that's part of like, I think that people think that mitigation either A needs to be easy or it's going to be better than maybe being doing something else in criminal justice or whatever. But it's like, so I think that it gets a bad rep because they think that it's soft or it's mushy or it's like pulling on the heartstrings and in an inappropriate way. Well, like, yeah, if you try to connect the dots too fast, like people will totally say the most mean, rude, insincere things, about somebody's mitigation evidence. Something like real tacky, like, oh, he killed these people because his daddy beat him when he was young. Like, it's not like that, right? Like, you're trying to
Right.
connect this to this,
Right. A
and
to B.
it's disgusting because you didn't become a whoever you are, a teacher, a judge, a cop, or whatever, whatever, because you graduated from high school or because you got to be like the captain of the football team. So now you're the leader at whatever business you own. It doesn't go like that. We all have our human experiences, but I think that that's not sometimes it kind of gets sidelined or people want to wrap it up real quick, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't even talk or spend time if people ain't going to give me 20 minutes to talk about what I do. I'll be like, you know what? Google it. Because if you're not going to allow me to share and showcase some love and compassion for the people that I have represented and what beautiful things I have learned from them and their mom and their sister and how their family functioned and dysfunctioned and all the things that I was able to reflect back on my own life with my own family, you don't want to
I don't
talk.
either.
You don't like, you know what I'm saying? You just want to tell me how much you believe in the death penalty or whatever. So it kind of just goes like that. And so, I also know how to prioritize my own energy around the subject matter. But, I think that that's kind of the thing that people think about mitigation. They're just like, oh man, it's expensive. We can't afford that. Well, I mean, you can't afford injustice.
Right.
How can you
Right.
afford that? How can you afford some of these, investigators or cops making bad judgment calls? How can you afford that?
Or botching investigations.
Yeah, totally. You know what I'm saying? Like, and my thing is that when I see something like that, oh, I lean in because I know
Mhm.
that they have mitigation too. And there's reasons why they're competing so hard and hiding and lying is because something else is going on, either at home or they need to make a promotion or they need a lot of human things are happening in that kind of scenario. So let's just shed a light on it too.
Mhm.
We're not going to be able to take the flashlight from us on the defense because we walk in there negative. We
At
have
the
to try to
bottom of the
gain.
scale.
Yeah, we got to try to gain and get to zero and maintain. So, but it's okay to show all the things that are going on here so people have all the information before they make a choice about somebody's life.
Mhm.
And that's all that we're doing is mitigation is evening the playing field a little bit. And a lot of times mitigation don't come in until after they're found guilty in a punishment phase or in a punishment hearing. It takes a real professional, like, somebody who is really like hardcore who knows how to front load mitigation. Like, I would love to teach people how to do this. This is why I have to switch over from doing my cases all the time to teaching people and mentoring them and coaching them and helping them see when they get in their own way to do the next best thing.
Yes, because there's a client that I know that has already been through the conviction phase, has been in prison for a very long time, and been working on their case, and they had to go get a mitigation specialist to work on their case to bring it up for an appeal because no information was brought in at the time they were going through their case. So, now it's backtracking instead of doing it from day one, right? You have to backtrack and go back and figure out all this old information. And so if it's done
Right.
right the first time, then that saves them the time, it saves you the time, and then it could save their life, period. And I don't think
Right.
people
Well, and that's
understand that.
important. That's really, really important to remember that, like, the appeal process and mitigation happening then, it's low percentage. All mitigation is winning, doing all
Before.
that work pre-trial and at trial level. Post conviction, that's something else because you have to make sure you didn't sign a plea. You have to make sure you went to trial and you got found guilty and they didn't present anything for and or around punishment, and that was something that you actually had or that they could have used. So that's a lot of proven from 10 years, 5 years ago, or
Mhm,
more. And so it's like mitigation is all like cashing in better for better outcome, because what we're trying to do is to mitigate a sentence less than the maximum. And
mhm,
here in Texas, a felony is 5 to 99. So that's a wide range. And depending on what that looks like, we can get it, lower by presenting certain information. Still, it depends on the DA and it depends on the judge. And if we can't get past them, and you have a good mitigation specialist and a good lawyer who's a good storyteller and presenter, right? Then you need to take it to trial because let the jury hear it. Like if you can't get through to the judge or the prosecutor, then let the jury hear it. Because I tell you what, lawyers, they want to win. And if a prosecutor looks at some of the mitigation evidence in the negotiation part and they're figuring out, do we want to take this to trial or not? Because the prosecutor has to offer that plea.
mhm.
And so if they say like no, no, or they think that they're going to lose, they'll offer a good plea. If
Well,
they
here in
don't
North
think that,
Carolina.
some of that part of the negotiating helps us to determine like do we take it to trial or do we not take it to trial or not. And if you don't have a good if you don't have a good lawyer, you don't have a good defense, then no, you should plea. Like, but that's your own personal choice. It's just a matter of like understanding how do we utilize this mitigation evidence for the maximum benefit.
Mhm. Well, here, these attorneys love to tell you to take the plea. Like, that's
Yeah.
just what they've been trained to do. I don't know if it's because
Yeah,
they're
it's
overloaded.
not the only place. It's not the only place because I don't know, but going to trial has gone out of style or something.
Mhm. I mean, as they say, it takes millions and millions of dollars to go to trial, so it's easier just to hand out pleas than to take it to trial, but, I mean, you have that right to prove they have to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, not
It's a big
just.
risk. It's a big risk, and if you're dealing with someone you don't trust, you have to be careful there too. Like, this is a big part of a factor that we do need to think about, or that I feel like anybody, in general, chatting and on this conversation need to think about. It's a big choice. You're rolling the dice, you're taking a big risk, and if you walk into a courtroom and you don't trust your attorney and y'all don't really have integrity within that defense relationship, sometimes a lack of integrity looks like guilt to people who don't know what they're looking at. So you got to
Mhm.
be careful because you already walking in there looking a little guilty, right?
Oh,
And
a
so
lot
then we got
guilty here.
yeah, okay.
In
So
America,
then
you
there's
are.
that, right? And so then there's that part of it, and then you have you're not on the same page as your attorney. You don't really know them all the way. You're really just taking a big risk, and there's nothing wrong with risking big. Do what it is that what you need to do. I think that that's really important. It's just a personal choice. And anytime I've had a conversation with somebody who's at this crossroads and choosing on if they plea or go to trial, I mean, it's their choice. And my job as a mitigation specialist is to help them understand that choice. And the lawyer helps them understand and answers all the questions because ultimately we can't really make that choice for them. We can advise them. And I can say, what information do you need to know? Let me help you get it so you can make the most educated choice you can. And I also know that like not everybody gets, zealous representation. They are, it is, the law that they get a lawyer. It doesn't mean they get a good one.
Right. Hmm. That is true.
And that's
Oh,
huge, especially on the post conviction side, and talking with people who say, because if I'm going to take a case post conviction, there's so many conversations that need to be had between me and the lawyer and the lawyer and the client before I say yes to that, because of the uphill battle that it is. And if they don't want, for me personally, for Victoria Rusk, if you don't want a restorative justice approach to your appeal, you can count me out,
right.
because I want everybody to be involved.
Yeah, and restorative justice is a major player. I think North Carolina has just started to bring it into our prisons, but it is such a game changer for the whole community. It's so important that every community has restorative justice in schools, in the court system, in prison, because that's how you heal your community, not just throwing people away with life and giving them the death sentence. You have to also heal the person that was wounded because they never get over that. And I've heard so many people say, "Oh, well, I don't feel better that they got life." Well, you're not, because you haven't got you have to heal
Well,
that
and you just like
hurt.
really, yeah, you don't know where that person is on their own healing journey too. And so that's why I bring it to the table. I'm willing to even go do, I'm willing to go do all the work. And if you can't support this part of the post conviction investigation, then we just are not aligned, because my work is holistic. My work as, a criminal justice professional is spiritual too. I can't help
Mhm.
it, because we have to perform miracles.
Yes.
Like, that's what we are doing here. And like, I understand the miracle making process. So since I have this knowledge, I'm so thankful. I can't do it without the cooperation of all these other souls. So it's not even like we're just going to do it my way, but I can't do it any other way than how Victoria does it.
Right. And the way you do it is the way it should be, but people have to get used to the change because they're not taught to
Yeah.
do holistic, and so it's
Right.
hard for
Yeah,
people
and
to
I mean, I
change.
try to be like, I try to be cool about my way of doing things, because I want people to come to me no matter what. I'm going to meet them where they're at. And if I meet you where you're at, then we're able to navigate with your strengths. Strength based theory is the way that we navigate any case or any person, any job, any situation, circumstance, is the strength based approach on what people really can do and what they're good at. And then the other stuff gets ironed out. And that's the whole thing about like even trying to mitigate the mitigation, because sometimes it is very traumatic and triggering, and it's not easy. So how do we be so smart? Well, we look at the strengths of the case, we look at the strengths of the person, the witness, the lawyer, the all that. And that's the part of how we put together this mitigation investigation, and then how we're going to present it. And that's
Ex-
individual to the thumbprint,
Yeah.
those
So,
strengths.
there's one last question. How can individuals or organizations support the work of mitigation specialists?
Hmm. Um, I mean, I think that it kind of starts with a variety of different ways. First things first, it would be like maybe depending on like look who your community is. Okay, like is it a church? Is it a law school? Is it a high school? Is it a boys and girls club? Is it your law office? Right? And where do you see that needs help? Right?
Mhm.
One thing that I do like to communicate or talk to people about is, mitigation campaigns, and how do you actually do that? And, because it could be anything from passing out flyers at the jail for the people who are visiting their loved ones, right? Like I have a flyer that I made that talks about mitigation witnesses, and anybody that hits me up can get a copy of it. I'll just send it over, right? It could be churches who want to organize bail money. So I have a friend who every Mother's Day she raises money up to Mother's Day, and then she bails out mamas at jail. And so this is like, when you're organizing around whatever your cause is, knowing what mitigation is, because you're going to meet people who need help.
Mhm.
And then also, it would be even like I go do talks at law schools and stuff, and I'm happy to do any kind of, you know, education via the Zoom and everything. But it's like, so being able to, for law students to know what it is and to them to be able to go to trainings if that's not presented at in their curriculum.
Correctly, and it's not.
And I know it's not. Yeah. I mean, my like, my online course, is available. And, I'm thoughtful about who becomes my students, but it's just a matter of like Mitigation University being a part of the curriculum in all criminal justice, departments and community colleges or at law schools or even clinics, just knowing
Mhm.
like what that is and how you organize that information. And then I would also say too that, some of the campaigns can also just, one mitigation specialist like saying like, oh, okay, I'm going to look, through Google or Victoria's book, or, utilize the information that I learned doing mitigation cases and what I learned is true. And I'm going to create my own campaign. So that way, I can build my business. And that way, I'm educating judges and going to criminal defense association seminars and conferences, and chatting it up and talking about it. I mean, it really is like, feet to the pavement a lot of times, doing a lot of grassroots. I think right now, like I don't have, a $50,000 budget to make billboards or whatever, but like if I had access to that kind of money, well then, I'll do it. It's just a matter of like where or how are things, going. I think that every person who's a mitigation specialist, just like me, should have their own course and should have their own book and should
Mhm.
write something and or create, accessible information for people. That's the like the books that are out there about mitigation, they're great, but they're all technical. And I needed practical application. I needed to be able to give something to somebody like my grandma who could read
Mhm.
it and
Yeah.
understand it and know what to do. And then she's going to be, going to bingo and talking to whoever. And then they'll say, like, yeah. And, and she will, either have an extra book or tell me about it, or, I mean,
Word of mouth.
I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah,
And
word of mouth is the best.
yeah, and so I mean, I feel like that's kind of how it goes, and then it grows and grows and grows. I mean, here I am in 2023, doing, a podcast with you, and so it's like, and I hope to do, many, many more, and you just never know. But it doesn't go fast, because I want to say that a lot of the priorities right now are not mitigation. It's
Mitigation.
bail reform. It's,
Mhm.
the problems with the police departments. It's
Second
the innocent
chances.
people. Yeah, it's the innocent people who are in prison who are getting out. Those people are getting a lot of the criminal justice reform energy at the moment, and it's their time to shine. And soon we will care about the people who are found guilty and how they're treated. We'll get there, and I hope in my lifetime. But I understand where I'm at in the priority list, so I don't get crazy about, like some of the unrecognition that mitigation doesn't get this or that. I see what I see. I see people doing wonderful work. I see people, more mitigation specialists coming, into the profession, and I see more public defenders offices offering jobs to
For
mitigation.
mitigation.
So it's
Mhm.
happening and it is growing. And this is only in my 12 years that I'm seeing, like, there was no jobs in 2011 unless you worked at like a handful of places, right? And I
Right.
mean, so it was really, there was like nothing. And now there's like so much more.
So
And I'm
much.
always sharing like on LinkedIn and stuff. But it's like, and I would say 10 years from now, like, I hope every public defender's office has a couple of mitigation specialists.
Mhm. I know when I went to talk to the students at, UNC Chapel Hill, I took your book and told them that it's important for y'all to understand mitigation and to really understand and navigate it because it's gonna be important to your client, especially if you're gonna be a defense attorney. You need a good mitigation specialist to help you. Like, you need that help. That
Yeah,
takes some
or
heat
maybe
off
you'll
you.
become one yourself. There's a lot of
Mhm.
lawyers that do mitigation because there's not enough of us. So, that is true, and that, like, mitigation is the future, like, the algorithms are gonna get us a little bit, like, I already know that that's coming, but I mean, mitigation and those mitigating factors, they're everything, they're everything, and people are not gonna stop going to prison. This is still going to be happening for a long while. It is a sense of our reality, but to me, mitigation and understanding that skill and that how to present the information, how to actually gain the information honestly, and then present the information is its own key that's going to unlock the door and end mass incarceration. It will.
And
There's no
that's
doubt
the
in my
goal.
mind. Yeah,
That's
there's
the
no doubt
goal.
in my mind.
And yeah,
Hmm.
and I understand, and, like, that's the goal, and I think that that's what we need to start shifting to is mitigation and understanding it and make sure that we're advocating for that in all public defenders offices. Because I mean, that's why I grabbed onto it because I'm like, "This is something that could really help people, not get a long period of time, sometimes not even be found convicted of what they're being accused of because they have this background information of what this person has
Exactly.
been through."
Exactly.
Um
Right, because I mean, the other thing I think too is just creating access, right? So when you do a mitigation campaign or you're sharing the book, like you're actually creating access for people who are going to have strong voices in their community to have the information. And like me and my approach to mitigation and where I'm at is that, okay, I have the book in English. Now I need to get it in Spanish. And then I'm going to create, a whole campaign just for Spanish speakers. And so creating access, if you give
for all
somebody the
demographics.
information, they're going to turn around and turn it into exactly what it is that they need.
Mhm.
It's the gatekeepers that we need to look for and put our arm around and be like, oh, we don't do that no more.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have a copy of your book with you? You can show it to,
Yeah. Hold on.
the live audience that's watching, and there it goes, the little blue book. The little blue book.
I love it so much.
Please, y'all, I will actually put her link to her website, down in the description. Please go check out Victoria's website. Please, if you are interested, sign up for her one of her mitigation classes. I'm telling you, it will change your life. Definitely purchase the book and leave a comment. We're gonna wrap things up. So Victoria, tell us where we can, if anybody wants to reach out to you, where they can find you. I will put all your web information in the description and on the podcast, Podbean when we release the audio, so that everybody can have a chance to be able to reach out and see your stuff.
Okay, I appreciate that. So my business is Heart of Justice. I'm heartofjustice.org. Mitigationuniversity.com. You can find me on LinkedIn and you can find me on Facebook. Um, yeah, and that's it. That's where I'm at. Yes. And then I mean, you can also I've been on a few other podcasts that you can find on YouTube as well. And if any of this information touches your heart, please reach out to me. Let's have a
Please.
conversation. Invite me to your community, please, to have this same or similar conversation. I would love to do a presentation or even a Zoom for whoever, wherever. It doesn't even have to be a professional organization. I do like civic groups and churches and share this information because we are all impacted by crime, and the real why behind the crime is happening in all of our families. So
Yeah.
let's like know this information and talk about it and like, yeah. So I'm
Change our
happy to.
communities and our
Yes,
world.
yes. Yeah, and thank you so much for, allowing me to come on your show and share this information and, just, like, let my this is so aligned for me, and it feels great. So
Well,
thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you for all your great work. It takes a strong person to be and a force to do what you're doing, and you are changing the community each day at a time. And so I hope that we can get you up here in North Carolina to speak. I know we're having another CLE in February, for the
Okay.
students, and I would love for you to come speak to them because it's important for them to understand
Okay.
mitigation and really understand it. But yeah, we'll talk more offline about that. But
I would
thank you
love
so
that.
much.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. And I just wanna say, shout out to my mom and dad because they created me to be who I am, and so I'm just glad. for them because they help me be the light in the world too.
They create a fighter over here, you hear me? She ain't nothing to play with. You look at her, you be like, "Oh, she's a fighter."
Yes.
Alright, y'all. Y'all take care until next time.